The county courthouse steps were cold on the morning of the auction. Sarah sat in her wheelchair, surrounded by a group of neighbors who had become her unofficial support system. Tom Martinez stood protectively behind her, while Judge Williams whispered reassurances about last-minute legal interventions that they both knew wouldn't come. The gathered crowd of nearly 50 residents, reporters, and curious onlookers created an atmosphere more suited to a funeral than a property sale. Inside courtroom B, with its worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting, the proceedings felt surreal. Thompson's absence spoke volumes. He'd sent his brother-in-law's real estate investment company, Oak Valley Holdings LLC, to handle the dirty work. Their representative, a young man in an ill-fitting suit, avoided making eye contact with anyone in the room. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the marble walls. Opening bid for 1247 Oak Ridge Lane. Current market value $480,000, starting at $5,000 to cover outstanding HOA liens and legal fees. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Williams stood to object, citing predatory practices, but was quickly silenced by the court officer. The whole process took exactly 12 minutes. When the gavel fell, finalizing the sale to Oak Valley Holdings for $5,000, Sarah didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, Michael's wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. The mathematics of injustice were brutally simple. 30 years of memories, $500,000 in equity, gone for the price of a used appliance. The next morning's headlines wrote themselves. Disability veterans YDO loses HOME over HOA fines, sparked national outrage. 3 state representatives announced emergency legislation to limit HOA powers. Thompson's law firm, facing mounting public pressure, placed him on indefinite administrative leave. Local real estate agents whispered about Oak Ridge property values dropping as potential buyers balked at the HOA's reputation. Sarah had 72 hours to vacate her home. The community rallied one final time. Veterans groups provided free moving services, neighbors helped pack precious memories, and her daughter's guest room was prepared in another state. Each box felt like sealing away another chapter of her life with Michael. On her final morning in the house, Sarah took one last tour. She traced the growth marks on the kitchen doorframe where they'd measured their daughter. She touched the small dent in the living room wall from Michael's attempt at indoor golf during a rainy day. In their bedroom, she found his last Father's Day card tucked in his dresser drawer, along with a handwritten note about fighting for what matters. Her last act before leaving was deliberate. She placed 3 items in Thompson's mailbox: her 2015 outstanding contribution to the community plaque, a photograph of Michael receiving his Air Force commendation, and a simple handwritten note that read, "You've won the house, but lost your humanity." 6 months later, the state legislature passed the Sarah Chen Act, limiting HOA foreclosure powers and requiring mediation for disabled and elderly residents. Thompson resigned from the board after his law firm's internal investigation. Oak Valley Holdings sold the house to a developer who demolished it for a townhouse complex. But Sarah's story lived on, taught in property law classes as a cautionary tale about power, community, and the thin line between regulation and persecution. From her daughter's home in another state, Sarah watched the changes she'd inspired. Michael would be proud, she told her daughter one evening. He always said sometimes you fight battles so others don't have to. On her wall hung a shadow box containing her HOA violation notices, next to Michael's medals. Different kinds of war memorabilia, she thought, from different kinds of battles. The Oak Ridge Community Center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Marcus Thompson's face as he stood at the podium, his steel-rimmed glasses reflecting the anxiety of the packed room. The monthly HOA meeting had drawn an unprecedented crowd, with homeowners lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. Sarah sat in her walker near the back, watching as her community of 3 decades transformed before her eyes. The new violation enforcement system is non-negotiable, Thompson announced, his corporate lawyer's demeanor never wavering. First offense, $100. Second, $200. Third, $400. Each subsequent violation doubles. No exceptions, no excuses. He clicked through his PowerPoint presentation, graphs showing property values, and community standards compliance metrics filling the screen. This is about protecting your investments, he continued, though his slight smirk suggested something else entirely. Sarah noticed how Thompson's gaze lingered on certain properties during his presentation, mostly older homes, including hers. The photos in his slideshow felt like surveillance footage. A mailbox slightly askew, holiday decorations 3 days past the removal deadline, a garbage bin visible from the street. Each image was time-stamped and GPS tagged, evidence collected with almost military precision. The first violation arrived while Sarah was in the hospital. 3 weeks of spring rain had turned her usually manicured lawn into what Thompson's notice described as unauthorized natural growth, exceeding regulation height by 0.7 inches. The $100 fine ate into her grocery budget, but she paid it, hoping to avoid confrontation. Her next violation came just 2 weeks later. The Medicare-approved ramp, installed for her mobility needs, violated community aesthetic standards and was improperly permitted. The fact that she'd served on that architectural review committee for a decade, or that the ramp predated Thompson's presidency, didn't matter. The fine was $200. During one particularly humid week, when her MS symptoms flared so badly she could barely grip her coffee cup, Sarah received 3 separate violations. Peeling paint on her trim, $400. Unauthorized garden fixtures, the bird bath Michael had installed 20 years ago, $800. A crack in her driveway that Thompson declared a safety hazard, $1,600. The fines totaled more than her monthly Social Security check. At the next HOA meeting, Sarah gathered her courage to speak. Her walker squeaked slightly as she made her way to the microphone, Michael's service medals swaying gently from where she'd attached them to the handlebar. "I've been part of this community since before some of you owned homes," she began, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "My husband and I helped build." "Your 3 minutes are up, Mrs. Chen," Thompson interrupted, not even looking up from his phone. "Next speaker, please." The room fell silent, broken only by the soft whir of the ancient heating system and the muffled sobs of Mrs. Rodriguez, another widow who'd received similar violations that week. As Sarah made her slow way back to her seat, she caught Thompson checking his watch, a gleaming Rolex that seemed to mock the payment plan rejection notice in her purse. The next violation would arrive the following morning, posted before dawn by Thompson's newly hired compliance officer. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she opened yet another certified letter from the Oak Ridge HOA, the 16th one this year. The morning sun filtered through her kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the same breakfast nook where she and Michael had shared countless cups of coffee over their 30-year marriage. Now, 2 years after his passing, even this familiar corner of her home felt tainted by the growing stack of threatening correspondence. The craftsman-style house at 1247 Oak Ridge Lane hadn't changed much since they'd bought it in 1990. The same honey-colored hardwood floors still creaked in exactly the same spots. Michael's carefully installed crown molding, a weekend project that had turned into a month-long labor of love, still framed every doorway. The only significant addition was the steel ramp that now replaced the front steps, a necessity after Sarah's multiple sclerosis had progressed to the point where stairs became an impossible challenge. At 68, Sarah found herself fighting battles on multiple fronts. Her body, once capable of tending the award-winning rose garden that had graced the cover of the community newsletter, now betrayed her daily. The walker she relied on, decorated with Michael's Air Force medals and unit patches, served as both mobility aid and memorial. The medical bills from his final months still arrived regularly, each one a reminder of the aggressive cancer that had taken him far too soon. Their modest home, purchased for $120,000 in what was then a developing suburb, had appreciated to $480,000, a fact that should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it had become a source of constant anxiety. The property taxes alone strained her fixed income, but it was the HOA's increasingly aggressive enforcement that kept her awake at night. Sarah glanced at the framed photo on her wall. The 2015 HOA appreciation ceremony, where she received recognition for a decade of service on the Architectural Review Committee. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once been part of the very system now threatening her security. Back then, the HOA had operated more like a neighborhood social club, organizing block parties and coordinating holiday decorations. The regulations existed, but were enforced with understanding and compassion. Everything changed when Marcus Thompson's slate of candidates swept the board elections last spring. The former corporate lawyer brought his ruthless efficiency to community management, transforming the HOA into something that felt more like a hostile corporate takeover than a neighborhood association. As Sarah unfolded the latest notice, her arthritic fingers struggling with the crisp paper, she already knew what she would find. Another violation, another fine, another step toward the inevitable confrontation that kept her up at night. The morning light caught the edge of her wedding ring, sending a small rainbow dancing across the warning letter. Michael would have known how to handle this, she thought. He'd always been the fighter, the strategist. But now, for the first time in her life, Sarah found herself facing an enemy she wasn't sure she could defeat, not with her failing health, dwindling resources, and a system that seemed designed to prey on vulnerability rather than protect it. The morning Sarah's story hit the local news. Frost covered her struggling rosebushes like delicate lace. Channel 7's van parked discreetly across the street, their young reporter trying to look inconspicuous as she interviewed concerned neighbors. The headline, DSABLD WIDOW, faces HOA ECOOCUR, over $4,800 in fines, scrolled across phones and tablets throughout the community, forcing residents to confront what had been happening in their own backyard. Tom Martinez, Sarah's next-door neighbor of 20 years, had started his quiet rebellion weeks ago. Every morning before dawn, he would silently mow her lawn, clear her driveway, and check her mailbox for new violations. But Thompson's tactics evolved to match the resistance. The HOA board installed motion-triggered cameras, claiming they were for community safety. Within days, Tom received his own violation notice for unauthorized maintenance of another resident's property. The community fractured into camps. Some residents, led by retired Judge Patricia Williams, started a legal defense fund for Sarah. Others, particularly owners of newer homes, backed Thompson's vision of property value protection through strict enforcement. A few remained conspicuously silent, their pristine lawns and regulation-compliant exteriors speaking volumes about their priorities. Sarah's fines had reached $4,800 when she made her last attempt at resolution. Using her walker for support, she spent 3 grueling hours painting her own trim to match HOA specifications. The photo of her straddling on a step stool, Michael's medal still hanging from her walker, was captured by a passing neighbor. Within hours, it went viral on social media, accompanied by outraged comments and calls for HOA reform. Thompson's response was swift and calculated. The next morning, a professional compliance audit found the paint shade was coastal beige instead of the mandated autumn beige. The resulting fine pushed her total over $5,000, triggering the HOA's automatic foreclosure clause. The foreclosure notice arrived on what would have been her and Michael's 42nd wedding anniversary. Sarah sat in their favorite reading chair, holding the formal document with trembling hands, surrounded by memories. On the mantel, photos chronicled their life together. Their wedding day, Michael in his Air Force uniform. The day they moved in, both covered in paint and laughing. Their daughter's graduation, Michael's last Christmas, thin from chemotherapy, but still smiling. The community's reaction escalated. Local veterans groups organized protests outside HOA meetings. 3 different law firms offered pro bono representation, but Thompson had planned meticulously. Every fine, every violation, every procedural step was technically legal, if morally bankrupt. The final indignity came when Thompson's board refused to accept the $4,800 raised by Sarah's neighbors. The payment deadline has expired, his email stated coldly. The foreclosure will proceed as scheduled. That night, as Sarah packed the first box of family photos, she noticed Thompson in his Mercedes, slowly driving past her house. He didn't wave, but she caught the satisfaction in his smile as he surveyed what would soon be his board's most profitable enforcement action to date.